Ghana side. You have to understand what made Ghana where it ended up being. You have to understand what made Ghana be in a situation that it was in 2022, and you draw parallels to where we are as a country like Uganda. That's all it's going to come back to exactly that point. Now, let me start with one. In 2022, you have to go back 10 years before, in 2012. Between 2012 to 2014, there was a push by the global economies for African countries to issue what we call Euro bonds. Ekigambo Euro bonds is going to feature so much. Waliwo muvubuka tero kumpandikira bu notes nabutekamu awo people to follow later, but the rest namulabako. There was so much push by global economies to have Africans borrow money in a commercial way, and the commercial way by issuing Euro bonds. And says afuna Euro bonds nga Kenya, nga Malawi, Zambia, Ghana, Egypt, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire. There were like 14 countries in Africa. Now, before 2012, African countries had always borrowed concessionally. Zigenda mu parish clubs, obanga zigenda mu World Bank, IMF, Africa Development Bank, like that, because those are concessional loans. Now there is this push for them to borrow commercially. And the Euro bond, the only thing you have to appreciate on a Euro bond is this. You are lending it to international investment clubs, like the big banks, the city banks, the Standard Chartered, all those big investment companies. And the question was, why was there a push to have African countries take on the Euro bonds? At the time, Africa was rising. At the time, Africa yali yetaga infrastructure projects. Roads in Kenya when we were SGR. So you have to understand it from that context. So one of the countries that took the Euro bond or took a significant Euro bond was Ghana. So, and the majority of those Euro bonds were 10 years. 10 years. So in 2021, 2022, between 2022 and 2024, that was the first tranche of where they had to pay their Euro bond maturities. So in Ghana's situation comes in two ways. By mid-2022, they had close to 6 months before their first tranche of close to $1.5 billion okubelange maturing, and they had to pay it off. $1.5 billion. That is one. So to look at it at Uganda, we do not have a Euro bond. And for the wisdom and of the people who decided that Uganda should not take a Euro bond, I remember that I've done good research, but I've got some confidential information. That was Governor Mutebire at the time, PSSS Timo Hakanizi, and at the time the Minister of Finance, Ezra Suruma abangambi yachaliyo era ngena muno nyako mubuzeko. Those three people said we do not need the Euro bonds at the time because they believed we do not have the capacity to take on $1 billion as an economy. That was majority of their thinking. But it was a thinking that right now is protecting the country. So help me like the life and we keep moving. So botegere chintu ekirugamba Ghana mu 2022 etukangabula ye myezi mukaga nga yetaga close to $2 billion to pay. At the time, nga Ghana, their total reserves is a USD because every country keeps reserve. Every country. Uganda, we have close to $5 billion in reserves. They call them import cover. What money you need for people to import or to export like that. Etuka mu 2022, mid 2024. Nga teina we sobola kujja $1 billion $1 billion. Nga ine ebintu bibiri byesobola okukola ku issuing new Euro bond, naye ate ku issuing new Euro bond nga atijegezako kuji issuing tesobola lwaki. At the time the Russian war, Ukraine war had started. So now I want you to start paying attention how things start to add up. Bobo goberira kati wanu njagala ofocusing otegere Ghana bwe yali, otegere Uganda weeri. and you make a decision that your bonds in Uganda are safe, right? So today, May 2022, Ghana has significant treasury bonds in Ghana, but let's first focus. It has a euro bond. The euro bond, there is pressure for them to pay, but they do not have the money, because in the dollars, you must have the dollars. You must have either a dollar equivalent asset, gold. We're going to talk about gold, how Uganda is starting to buy gold right now. We're going to talk about Ghana is enough gold, enough gold reserves, enough dollar reserves, and yet the dollar had to be, the bond had to be paid, or they could default by November. And the market got to know about it. This is euro bond, not treasury bonds. The market got to know about it. And the two things happened. When you have, as a country, when you are to borrow, you can either borrow locally or internationally. You can borrow new debt, or you can roll over a new debt. Roll over no government in a gulaka. Let me borrow more money to pay off the old debt. Ghana negeza ko kwagalo raising a new euro dollar, a new euro bond. Neremwa. Because otalo lwali lutandise, ngekitegeza there is otalo lutandika. Investors, especially international investors, they move the money from emerging economies to safe havens. Ekyokubiri, nga batandise okulaba that Ghana is struggling with liquidity. At the time, mu 2022, nga the pension funds, the commercial banks, the Bank of Ghana itself, nga all of them, they have significant amount of debt. Inflation in Ghana never from the lows of 5, 7, 8%, netuka close to 50%. I know when I mentioned that actually, that was very true. Now imagine your inflation in Uganda, ngechintu kyabadde omutwalo gumu, okigula emitwalo kati kumpi gumu kitundu ba emitwalo ebiri in a space of 2 to 3 months. Omukulu abuuza what is euro bonds? Euro bonds are bonds issued in a different, euro bonds are bonds issued in a different currency, most times the US dollar. So you issue them to the international market. They list them in the London Stock Exchange, but in the dollar value. So not in your local currency. They use them to bring in some FX into the country. Where was I? So Ghana netuka ekiseera nga all their debt is held by pension funds. Nga tesiyina where to borrow, to lend. Banks nga ziri constrained. Bank of Ghana nga eri constrained. They can no longer struggle. They can no longer raise any dollars to pay off the loan. Inflation net come 50%. And the worst of the worst was SEDI against the dollar depreciated so much to the extent of 70%. So they had two problems. They had a significant inflation in a space of literally 2 to 3 months. Then they have significant depreciation of their FX in a space of like 4 to 5 months. And it was a market squeeze. So much tight that the cost of living in Ghana, no matter wherever you are, you were impacted. And the government had to wake up. They had to go back to IMF to say, IMF, we need help. It was extremely painful and bad. They needed to pay the euro bond. The market, the international market, was not lending them any more money. IMF, the Bank of Ghana reached a level when they can no longer. Bank of Ghana is the equivalent of Bank of Uganda. They could no longer sell treasury bonds. Actually, in 2022, the SEDI bonds, as are locally denominated, they were so much undersubscribed that the Bank of Ghana must print money to fund the government. And that made the situation even worse in terms of inflation. So, which one do you think Uganda is at right now? None. Peter, Uganda taina treasure, taina euro bonds. So we do not have, we're not about to go through that FX squeeze. We do not have a euro bond. We have dollar denominated loans, but those are not on the market. They are not tradable. Majority of them are concessional with IMF, with African Development Bank, with the Euro